Okay, good morning. Thanks for coming to Story Starters for Younger Children. The book I'm reading today is called The Chocolate Touch. Now, The Chocolate Touch is a story written that's a little bit different from a very old story. And the old story is about a man named King Midas. And King Midas had a magical thing to happen to him, and everything that he touched turned into gold. And this is a story that's kind of the same, but it's a story for children about a little boy. And the book is called The Chocolate Touch, so you can imagine, maybe everything turns into chocolate. So this book by Patrick Catling has a few pictures that I will show you as I come to them, but just settle down and listen to the story. I will be reading just 2 chapters of this book. And this book is probably one that if you are a new reader, it might still be a little bit hard to read. So this would be one that it would be a good one for a grown-up to read to you. But it's very easy for younger kids to understand the story. There's just a few big words and it might be kind of hard. So, The Chocolate Touch by Patrick Catling. There's a picture. I'll show you the picture right before I start. What can you guess? Looks like some medicine. Think about why sometimes you have to take medicine. Most of the time, John Midas was a very nice boy. Every now and then, of course, he broke a rule, such as the rule against pretending to be a tiger when his sister Mary was supposed to be getting some sleep. But generally speaking, however, he behaved very well. He should have behaved better. He lived in a comfortable house surrounded by a green lawn and wide-spreading shade trees that were suitable for climbing. His mother was gentle as well as practical. His father, when he didn't have to hurry to town, spent hours telling John interesting things about baseball and beetles, birds' nests, boats, and butterflies. John went to school and he liked it. His teacher, Miss Plimsoll, was fairly easy to get along with as long as he did careful work. He had received a new shiny golden trumpet and music lessons as a going to school present. Mrs. Quaver, the music teacher, had soon agreed to let him play small parts, a few notes at a time, with the school orchestra. Finally, there was Susan Buttercup, who was in his class. Susan had soft yellow curls, round pink cheeks, blue eyes, and one of the best collections of marbles in the neighborhood. John should have been completely well behaved, but he wasn't. He had one bad fault. He was a pig about candy. Boiled candy, cotton candy, licorice of all sorts, old-fashioned toffee, candy orange and lemon slices, Cracker Jack, jelly beans, fudge, lozenges for ticklish throats, nougat, acid drops, peppermint sticks, lollipops, marshmallows, and more than anything else, above all, chocolate. He devoured them all. While other boys and girls spent their money on airplanes, model airplanes, and magazines, or jump ropes, or pet lizards, John studied the candy counter. All his money went on candy, and all his candy went to himself. He never shared it. John Midas was candy crazy. At lunch one Saturday, Mrs. Midas noticed a couple of little red spots on the end of John's nose. "Look," she said to Mr. Midas, "John has spots." Mr. Midas leaned forward to look at them. He gravely shook his head and clicked his tongue. John tried to look too, but it's very difficult to see the end of your own nose without a mirror, unless you happen to be an elephant with a long nose that can bend it up. When John tried to look at the end of his nose, first with one eye, and then with the other, and then with both together, all he could see was a pink blur. Besides, trying to look at something so close made his eyes ache. "I can't see any spots," John said. "Well, I can," Mr. Midas said. "Just because you don't see a thing doesn't mean it isn't there. Try feeling the end of your nose with your finger." John rubbed his finger over the tip of a nose. It felt a little bit rough. "It might be the measles," Mrs. Midas said anxiously. She placed her hand on John's forehead to feel whether he was warmer than usual. "But I don't think he has a temperature," she decided. "I suspect John has been eating too much candy again," Mr. Midas said. "Have you been eating candy this morning, John?" "Some," John admitted. "What?" Mr. Midas asked. "Well," John replied, "well, I had a few cream delights. Susan gave them to me." "Anything else?" Mr. Midas asked. "I had a little toffee crunch," John said. "And what else?" Mr. Midas asked, beginning to look cross. John's ears grew red. He knew he wasn't supposed to eat candy before meals. "Oh, only, hardly anything else," he said. "John," Mr. Midas said, and his son recognized that tone. It meant that John had better tell everything. It turned out that John had been around to see most of his friends and had managed to get candy from nearly all of them. The list he recited was a very long one. "No wonder you have spots," Mr. Midas commented at last. "I think we'd better take John to see Dr. Cranium," he said to Mrs. Midas. Dr. Cranium was a tall, thin man with a bald head and had a gray mustache. He looked through his glasses at John and said, "He eats a lot of candy," Mr. Midas said. "He hasn't been eating his meals properly," Mrs. Midas said. "That's just what I thought," Dr. Cranium said. "I can tell by looking at him that he eats much too much candy." The doctor shone an electric light into John's right ear, and then he shone it into John's left ear. Then he showed it up in John's nose, and he told John to open his mouth and say, "Ah." Then he shone the light into his mouth. Much too much candy. Gracious me, he seems to be full of candy. He told John to sit down and relax, and then he picked up a small rubber-headed hammer and gave John a little tap on the knee, just below the joint. John's foot gave a weak kick, and John giggled. "That's nothing to laugh about," Mr. Midas said. "No, John," the doctor reproved him. "A healthy little boy who didn't eat too much candy would kick much harder than that." "I'm sorry," John said politely, "but I can kick harder if you want to." He gave a sudden high kick, which knocked the hammer out of Mr. Cranium's hand. It landed on its head and bounced across the room. "John!" exclaimed Mrs. Midas. "I'm so sorry, Miss Dr. Cranium. John, tell the doctor you're sorry for kicking his hammer." "I'm sorry I kicked your hammer," John said. "I recommend less candy," Mr. Cranium told Mr. and Mrs. Midas. "An upset stomach can lead to all sorts of complications." On the way home, Mrs. Midas tried to explain to John what she thought the doctor meant by complications. "You see," she said, "if you put too much of one kind of food in your stomach and not enough of the other kinds, it's bad for your whole body because different parts of your body need different kinds of food. Do you understand?" "I think so," John said. "You've been eating so much sweet stuff," Mr. Midas added, "that there isn't any room for eggs and meat and milk and bread and spinach and apples and fish and bananas and all the other things you're supposed to have to make you grow big and strong." "I like bananas," John said, "especially in thin slices covered with chocolate. They're called banana surprises." Mr. Midas looked at Mrs. Midas, and Mrs. Midas looked at Mr. Midas. They both shrugged their shoulders. Sometimes it was just so hard to make John understand things. At home, while Mrs. Midas was busy in the kitchen, Mr. Midas continued to reason with John. You mean you'd rather eat candy than anything else? And eat chocolate more than any other kind of candy? Mr. Midas asked. Yes, John assured him. Oh, yes. Don't you think there's such a thing as enough? Mr. Midas persisted. Don't you think that things are best in their places? I mean, don't you think there's a time for spaghetti and a time for roast beef and even a time for garlic toast as well as for chocolate? Or would you rather have chocolate all the time? Chocolate all the time, John replied emphatically. Chocolate's best, that's all. Other things are just food. But chocolate's chocolate. Chocolate. I think I understand, Mr. Midas broke in sharply. Very well. He took a deep breath and went on. John, he said, if you can't understand what sort of diet is really best for you, can't you at least get it into your head that you make your mom very unhappy when you eat so much candy that you can't eat anything else? This conversation always seemed to get around to the effect of John's candy eating on his mother. John couldn't see how it possibly could do her any harm if he ate candy. He sat silent for a moment. Then he said, can I go out and play now, Daddy? Please? Chapter 2. What is gonna happen? It was a Sunday afternoon. The sun was sinking low in the sky, but the air was still quite warm. John was wandering along in the direction of Susan's house, absent-mindedly looking down at the sidewalk when his eye was suddenly caught by a gleam. It was a gleaming silver gray coin lying right in his path. The coin was the size of a quarter, but even as he leaned forward to pick it up, John noticed there was something kind of strange about it. It did not have a picture of George Washington or a picture of an eagle the way a quarter was supposed to. On one side, there was a picture of a fat boy, and on the other side were the letters J.M., which was kind of funny, John thought, because those letters happened to be his initials, John Midas. Grasping the coin firmly, he ran on towards Susan's house. She liked to collect things. He thought she might be interested to know that he had the beginning of a coin collection. Although he was in the habit of going over to Susan's by the same route once or twice almost every day, this afternoon John found himself turning left when he usually turned right. There's a picture of what's going to happen. I always go the same way, he thought. This time for a change, I'm going to go a new way. He didn't stop to wonder that you cannot go east by going west unless you go all the way around the world. Only 2 blocks along the unfamiliar street, John came to a small store on the corner. It was a neat red brick building with 2 big windows. They were full of all sorts of candy. Susan was immediately and absolutely forgotten. John pressed his nose against one of the windows. He was imagining the taste of those chocolate-covered almonds and chocolate fudge on the other side of the glass when he noticed a man in a white apron standing behind the counter and beckoning to him. John was surprised. He didn't expect the store to be open on a Sunday. Don't just stand there in the doorway, John, the man called heartily. Come on in. Get some water. Get some fresh, sweet, creamy chocolate. There's a special today. How did the man know his name, John wondered. He couldn't remember ever having seen that store before. The storekeeper saw John hesitate. The chocolate I use in my kitchen comes direct from the heart of Africa. I use none but the best ingredients. And my recipes, oh, well, I bet you've never had chocolate like mine before. Come on in. Thank you, John replied, walking to the counter. But you see, the trouble is, well, no money, said the storekeeper. No money whatsoever? What have you got there in your hand? John had forgotten the old coin in his hand. Oh, He said, "This is part of my coin collection. I mean, I'm going to start a coin collection, and I'm going to use this one to start it." "Let me have a look at it," the shopkeeper said, and he looked at the coin. "Aha," he exclaimed. "Is it any good?" John asked, his hopes suddenly rising. "Very good," said the storekeeper. "In fact, it's the only kind of money I accept. But I don't suppose that you'd want to spend it on a box." "A whole box?" "I imagine you'd rather keep this for your coin collection rather than spend it on chocolate, wouldn't you?" "Oh, no," John said. "Chocolate any day." "Go ahead then, help yourself," the storekeeper said, pointing out to a heavy-laden show table piled high with large cellophane-wrapped candy boxes. They were all exactly alike. "You mean I can have one of these?" John asked, his eyes round with surprise. The candy boxes were as big as the ones his father always brought home at Christmas time. "Just help yourself," the storekeeper assured him. "That is, unless you think it might be better to ask your mother first." "She wouldn't mind," John said hastily and blushed. The storekeeper winked knowingly. "I'm sure she won't," he agreed. "Not in the long run, anyway." John tucked one of the large boxes under his arm, declined the storekeeper's offer to wrap it as a gift, thanked him, and hurried out of the store before there could be any question of anyone changing his mind. The storekeeper smiled as he watched his customer hurrying down the street. And that is as far as I will read for this book, The Chocolate Touch. You kind of wonder if that was sort of a magic box of chocolate, don't you? If you want to find out what happens, you can go to the library and check out this book called The Chocolate Touch and see what happens to John and his magic box of chocolates. Thank you for coming today, friends, and I hope you come again sometime. See you next week, I hope. Goodbye.